Hello Fred, hello Coty, hello Clara, hello Bay, hi Albert. Pops Mountain TV has a special new format this week. We're going to try out a format with 3 extra features. Feature number 1 will be Nonna's special word. Feature number 2 will be viewers' comments. And feature number 3 is a thing that I've called Met in Morzine. And that's something that I've seen in Morzine that I think you would like to see yourselves. Despite these changes, the main feature of Pops Mountain TV is a film about something that I think you'll find interesting. And this week, the film is about the Madwomen of Morzine. Known in French as Les Possédées de Morzine, these were some young girls and young women who 150 years ago were thought to have been possessed by the devil. I hope you enjoy it. Just to remind you, the last Pops Mountain TV episode came from Italy, from the Val Maira near Turin. I'd been there with some friends, Gareth and Dorian, and we'd done some ski de randonnée. I got some very nice comments and I got quite a few questions. I'm just going to pick out a couple of questions that I think would be interesting to other people to have answered, I hope. The first one came from Paul in Manchester, and he asked me, how long did it take us all to climb up to the top of the mountain on the randonnée that I showed you? The answer to that question was, it took us about 3 hours. Another question was from Alex. He asked,
I had a question which was whether you got the book knowing you were going to do it, or whether it was a book that you'd had a long time and it inspired you to do it.
So Alex, the answer to that question is neither one nor the other. In fact, I saw the book when I went to the Val Maira in September with my friends from the UK. We went hiking. That was an earlier episode of Pops Mountain TV. And when I saw it, I said to myself, I'm going to come back on skis with my friends from Morzine. Another question was from Fred, and he asked,
what food were you eating at restaurants? It looked like a weird kind of pasta.
Good question, Fred. In fact, the answer to that question was in the video. The lunch that we had was called
Atale Bolognese.
But in fact, as the guide pointed out, in Italy, they tend not to use the term bolognese. They tend to just say it's pasta with a ragu.
For example, bolognese is another word that we don't use so much in Italy.
Oh, okay.
We say ragu, that is a French word.
Ragu.
But for example, when I was asking, he said there is this with ragu,
No.
not bolognese. But bolognese is used
But,
everywhere in the world.
yeah.
But
I've come to the graveyard behind the church in Morzine. Just behind you over there is the school. In fact, the school that Fred, Coty and Bay went to is a new school, and the old school at the time I'm talking about used to be in the presbytre, which is the house where the priest lives, Monsieur le Curé. How far back? Well, I'm talking about 150 years ago. 150 years ago means that at that time the children playing in the playground that you can hear now, it means that the children playing in the playground then would have been the grandparents of those children. So it's a long time ago. An event took place on a winter's morning outside the school concerning a little girl called Paulette Tabele. And this event and all that led from it only ended with the intervention of the Pope, with the intervention of the French Emperor of the time, who was called Napoleon III, and it took them 15 years to put a stop to the events and the movement that little Paulette started 150 years ago. So, what happened? Why did it happen? How did it end? Well, that's the story I'm going to tell to you today. So, what happened? what happened on that day 150 years ago? Well, I can set the scene fairly well because nothing much has changed since that day. So if you look behind me, you can see over here the Maison de la Curée, which at the time was the school. You can see the church just across the way here. And then just down below, I'm not sure if you can see it, but you can see the river. And as a matter of interest, you can also see Dorian's farmhouse on the hill there. So, to go back to Paulette, Paulette was 10. She was just about to be confirmed. In the lives of the people in Morzine at that time, in particular the lives of little girls like Paulette, pretty much the only exciting thing which happened was going to church and listening to the curé's incredibly powerful speeches, sermons, when he talked about the devil and he talked about how you had to behave, and if not, you would go to the devil, and he talked about how wonderful Christ was. And in the church at the time, there were some beautiful paintings, some of them about heaven and some of them about hell. So that's the background. Paulette ran out of the school at the end of the morning lessons, following a friend of hers. The friend of hers ran across the road and unfortunately ran into the river and looked as if she was going to drown. But fortunately, a passerby, somebody dragged her out and saved her from drowning. Paulette saw this and saw this as a miracle. Her friend had been saved from certain drowning, and she immediately felt that this was something which had been the hand of God. She fainted on the spot. She was so overcome. She fainted on the spot. When the curé came to wake her up, the curé picked her up, woke her up, looked at her, and she immediately started to shake. She started to shake, she started to wave her arms about, she started to just generally behave very, very oddly. And then she started to speak. And when she spoke, she said that she had received messages from the Virgin Mary, and that she had received a letter, and she opened the letter and she read the letter. And the next day, she no longer said that she was receiving information from the Virgin Mary. She started to say all sorts of awful things. She started to swear, she started to blaspheme, and it became clear, as far as the priest was concerned, that she had been inhabited by the devil, that the devil was inside her. So little by little, all her friends started behaving the same way. Only the girls, not the boys. And then, another stage, it started to pass to the adults. 200 of the 1,000 female inhabitants were possessed by the devil. So, what happened next? Well, what happened next was that people at the church said, if they're possessed by the devil, they need to be exorcised. Exorcising is a ceremony, a performance which the clergy carries out to take the devil out of somebody who is possessed by the devil. Common at that time. And in fact, strangely and interestingly, you had to pay for it. So if you had a member of your family who was possessed by the devil, you had to pay the curé to carry out the performance, the ceremony, to get the devil out of the person. So that's what the curé did. He exorcised the 200 women on a regular basis and was paid for it. But to no avail. They carried on just the same. What about the other side of the town? What about the people who were non-believers? The mayor, the doctors, people with a bit of scientific background. What did they do? Well, they didn't know what to do. They couldn't explain it. They said maybe it's poor food, poor diet, maybe it's something in the water. There was a story that maybe there was something in the bread they were eating that was intoxicating them. They didn't know. Some of them were suspicious. They said, maybe the priest is poisoning them. Maybe the priest is giving them when he does communion, maybe he's giving them something tainted, some tainted water, some special water which gives them this thing. It's 11 o'clock. Events came to a head in 1864. That was 8 years after the epidemic of possession had started. by this time it was a national event. It was in all the newspapers. Tourists would come here to watch the possessed women of Morzine. They were called in French les possédées de Morzine. And in 1864, the local bishop decided that he would come down and he would attempt to carry out a mass exorcism of the 200 possessed women. This event took place in the church here. There were many people here. There were gendarmes here. There were troops here. The population of Morzine was here. There were journalists. There was even apparently a photographer. And the mayor at the time was there as well. The mayor at the time was a really accomplished painter called Laurent Beau. And he's famous for quite a few paintings, quite a few artwork inside of churches locally. And he painted a very famous painting of this scene. In fact, he painted 2 paintings and a sketch of the scene. Unfortunately, it turned into a riot because when the bishop started his service, he decided that he wouldn't exorcise them. He decided that the exorcism wasn't working and that he didn't want to continue to be seen as a failure. So he refused to exorcise them, and the women attacked him as a mob. They had to be pulled off him by the troops, by the gendarmes, and it was an amazingly well-publicised event, and it was a complete disaster for the church.
So for the moment, we'll take a pause there. I'll tell you the rest of the story of the Madwomen of Morzine in next week's episode of Pops Mountain TV. We can now go back and we can pick up on our special features, starting with Nonna's special word.
Well, my special word this week is an old-fashioned word, chilblains. And it's a word that you don't hear very much anymore. But in fact, chilblains still exist. Now, my grandmother used to talk to me about chilblains, and she would say, when I went outside to play, it's cold outside, be careful, make sure you've got proper socks on and you've got proper shoes on, because otherwise you might get chilblains. They are painful swellings at the ends of your toes. It becomes very inflamed and very sore and itchy. And in fact, you can get them in your fingers as well. So it's your extremities. And it's caused by your toes or your fingers becoming very cold in damp conditions, and then coming into a warm house and very suddenly getting warm again. I can remember having them a couple of times, and it didn't last very long. Here we have the cure. You use the white of an egg, a tablespoon of honey, a tablespoon of flour, and a dash of glycerin. Mix this all together, spread it over your toes, then put a nice clean sock on the top and go to bed at night with this mixture on your foot. And in the morning, wash it off with nice warm water. And apparently, that does a lot of good.
So I've been living in Morzine for the last 8 years, and I'm leaving a week tomorrow to head back to England, see family, see friends, go to a big wedding, and then I'll leave England back into Europe, and the idea is to cycle around the world and visit as many countries as possible.
How long will it take?
Volunteer for projects. I'm going with an open mind. I'm looking at 2 to 3 years, to be quite honest. No commitments. I've closed my business. I've sold all my possessions.
Yeah?
Apart from my plumbing tools.
Yeah.
Which will go into storage. And I'm just going with this bike.
Wow. What's that red thing down there?
That is unleaded fuel.
It looks like a fire extinguisher.
Yeah, it's unleaded fuel which goes in my camping stove, which will run on diesel, unleaded fuel, white gas, canister gas. Okay. So it's the unleaded fuel you can get in any country. Kerosene you can get in any country.
So where would you sleep?
In a tent.
And
I'll camp wild.
Oh, right.
So I've got a tent, a very good sleeping bag. My home is on my bike.
So will you go through the winter?
Well, that's where it'll get interesting, where I'll be looking at weather patterns, and that's where I'll maybe get settled on a project for 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
When the weather turns. But obviously, Asia, generally the weather's pretty good.
Yeah.
Around, you've got a lot of rain. But this is something that I'm going to,
Yeah, take it by ear. Yeah.
day by day.
It's part of the philosophy.
Exactly.
It's not an objective, it's a journey. It's not arriving, it's the... And you don't actually need to get fit, do you? Because you're going to get fit in the first few months.
First, yeah.
You don't need to have a training
You don't need to
ride.
worry about that, do you? It'll just come on slowly, and before I know it, I'll be absolutely flying.
Yeah.
I can't wait for it. I cannot wait. It's going to be a life-changing
And how are we going to
experience.
find out about what you're doing? Are you going to have a
I'm gonna
blog
put it on
or
Instagram?
Instagram?
Pictures.
Pardon?
Yeah. Some pictures on Instagram.
And what's your? How do I follow you? What's your
Peddling Paul?
peddling Paul?
Peddling Paul. #saddle.rash.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
All right. Nice meeting you too.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.